The room smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers, and the particular kind of money that doesn't know how to apologize. I stood in the doorway of Suite 412 at Mercy General Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and I looked at the man in the bed, and I made a decision that took me 31 years to arrive at. Not the decision you're thinking. Not the one his lawyers were afraid of, not the one his other children were already calling each other about in hushed voices in the hallway outside, not the one that would have been easiest and most satisfying and most justified. A different decision, the hardest one. But I'm getting ahead of myself because this story doesn't begin at a deathbed. It begins the way most stories about invisible daughters begin, with a woman who loved the wrong man for the right reasons, and a child who spent 3 decades trying to understand the cost of that love. My name is Simone Elaine Carter. I am 31 years old. My mother's name was Gloria Carter, and she was the most beautiful woman I have ever known in my life, and she loved a man named Richard Whitmore for 11 years, which is 11 years longer than he deserved, and she never once spoke badly of him in front of me, which is a grace so large I am still growing into understanding it. My father is Richard Whitmore. You may know that name. Whitmore Industries. Commercial real estate, hospitality, private equity. The kind of wealth that has been building for 3 generations and compounds like interest on interest on interest, until the number stops meaning anything and becomes simply a fact of the atmosphere, like altitude or pressure. Forbes listed him at $4.2 billion in 2019. I read that article at my kitchen table in my studio apartment in Dorchester with a cup of instant coffee that cost 89 cents, and I thought, he has never once sent me a birthday card. That is not the most painful part of this story. I want to tell you that up front, because I know that sentence sounds like the most painful part, and I need you to understand that the story gets deeper than birthday cards and Forbes lists. It gets into the kind of territory that requires you to sit with uncomfortable things, things about love and race and what it means to be claimed, to be named, to be real to the people who made you. But we begin where we begin. We begin with my mother, Gloria, who was 23 years old when she met Richard Whitmore at the hotel where she worked as a front desk manager. The Whitmore Boston, his family's flagship property. She had worked there for 2 years and had been promoted twice because she was exceptional at her job, which she was at every job she ever held, because Gloria Carter did not know how to do things halfway. She was from Roxbury. She had put herself through community college and then through UMass Boston working nights, and she had graduated with a business degree and a specific kind of dignity that comes from having built every single thing yourself with no safety net beneath you. Richard Whitmore was 41 when he met my mother. He was separated from his wife, Eleanor, though not divorced, a distinction that would matter enormously later and that my mother understood clearly from the beginning, or believed she understood. He was tall and silver-haired and had the easy confidence of a man who had never once had to wonder if he was allowed to be in a room. He came into the hotel on a Tuesday afternoon for a site inspection, and my mother was behind the front desk, and something happened in that lobby that I have heard described in different ways over the years. My mother's version, quiet and careful, the version I constructed from the evidence of my own existence. He asked her to dinner. She said no the first time. She said no the second time. The third time, she said yes, and I have never decided whether that yes was a failure of judgment or an act of courage or simply the natural and human response to being seen completely by someone for the first time after a long time of not being seen at all. She said yes, and 11 months later she was pregnant with me, and Richard Whitmore's response to that information was a thing I have had to process and reprocess and process again across the entire length of my adult life because it was not simple. It was not the response of a monster. It was the response of a coward, which in some ways is worse because monsters you can hate cleanly, but cowards make you grieve. He said he would take care of us. He said he loved my mother. He said the situation was complicated, meaning a leaner, meaning the Whitmore family name, meaning his own father was still alive and ran the company with an iron grip and had opinions about what a Whitmore did and did not do that were as inflexible as the marble in his lobby floors. He said, "Give me time." My mother gave him time. She gave him 11 years of time. She raised me in a clean apartment in Jamaica Plain, not Roxbury where she was from, because Richard wanted her somewhere slightly better, which was how he said it, somewhere slightly better, without apparently hearing what those words meant or who they were coming from. He paid for the apartment. He paid for my school, the good private school in the Back Bay, where I was one of 4 black children in the entire lower school, and where I learned very early the specific performance required of a child who does not fit the frame she has been placed in. He came to see us. Not every week, not even every month with regularity, but he came. And when he came, he was present in the way that mattered to a child, which is to say, he got down on the floor and played with me, he read to me, he called me his girl in a voice that sounded like he meant it. He just never took us anywhere. He never introduced us to anyone. We were a life he lived in a room with the door closed, and outside the door was his real life, his official life, the life with the Whitmore name on it, and that life did not include Gloria Carter, and it did not include me. I need you to feel what that means for a child. I need you to understand what it does to a small person to grow up knowing that the man who reads to her and calls her his girl would not acknowledge her existence at a dinner table, at a holiday, at any of the events that constitute the record of a family's life together. I went to school every day and I sat in classrooms with children who had 2 parents who appeared at every event, who were photographed together, who existed in each other's lives publicly, completely, without qualification. And I understood from very young that my father's love for me came with terms and conditions that he had never shown me in writing, but that I was expected to abide by anyway. I abided. I was a good student. I was excellent, actually. Not because I was performing for him, not consciously, but because my mother's standard of doing things completely had gotten into me deep, and I could not approach anything halfway either. I won prizes. I gave speeches at graduation. I was accepted to Boston University on a partial scholarship that my father supplemented without fanfare, a wire transfer with no note. He did not come to my high school graduation. Billionaire had planned a trip to Europe that coincided, he said. He was sorry. He would make it up to me. He sent flowers and a check and a card with his neat handwriting that said, "I am proud of you, Simone. Keep going." I read the card 3 times and put it in a box with the other cards he had sent over the years, the birthday cards that arrived consistently on the correct date. I will give him that, and I told myself that a card was something, that a man who sent cards consistently cared about the person he was sending them to, that I should be grateful. My mother knocked on my bedroom door that evening. I was sitting on the bed with the card in my hands, and she sat beside me, and she didn't say anything immediately. She had a particular gift, my mother, for knowing when words would be the wrong instrument. After a while she said, "You are not invisible, Simone. You are just hidden. There is a difference. Hidden means someone put you there. It does not mean you are not real. I thought about that for years. I am still thinking about it." The summer I turned 22, 2 things happened. First, I graduated from BU with a degree in finance. Second, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. I am going to tell you about my mother's illness with the same care she brought to everything because she deserves nothing less. She was diagnosed in June. By September, it was stage 3. By December of the following year, it was stage 4. She fought it with the same complete lack of halfway that she brought to everything in her life. Every treatment, every clinical trial. Every morning she woke up and chose to be present in her body, even when her body was the battlefield. I moved back home. I had been living in a shared apartment in Alston with 3 other recent graduates, starting my first job at a financial analysis firm downtown, beginning what I understood was supposed to be the beginning of my adult life. I moved back to Jamaica Plain, and I became my mother's person in all the ways that mattered, the appointments and the medications, and the nights when the pain was too much, and the mornings when the hope was too fragile, and the ordinary Tuesdays that were just ordinary Tuesdays, and therefore the best kind. Richard Whitmore sent money. He sent significant money. I will not pretend otherwise. He set up an account that covered the medical bills that insurance did not cover, and in the context of a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, those bills are the kind of number that would have destroyed us without that account. I know this. I have never pretended it was nothing. But he came to see her twice in 2.5 years. Twice. The first time was 6 months after the diagnosis, when it was still possible to tell himself that she would be fine, that the treatment would work, that this was a chapter with a resolution at the end of it. He came on a Wednesday afternoon and sat in our living room and held her hands and looked at her with something in his face that I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched and identified as love, real love, the kind that had been there from the beginning and had been allowed to be genuine only in rooms with closed doors. The second time was 3 weeks before she died. He sat beside her bed, and he talked to her for 2 hours, and I was in the next room, and I did not listen. I had learned by then that whatever existed between them was theirs. It had always been theirs. The closed door was not only his. She had chosen the terms of this love with her eyes open. She had told me that more than once in the years after I was old enough to ask direct questions, and I had to honor that she had made a choice even if the choice had cost her things she hadn't fully calculated at 23. He left at 5 in the afternoon. He squeezed my hand in the hallway before he went and looked at me in a way that said things his mouth did not say. I looked back at him and said nothing. My mother died on a Thursday morning in March. She was 52 years old. She died in the apartment in Jamaica Plain with the morning light coming through the curtains she had chosen at a discount store 15 years earlier and had never replaced because she liked them. I was holding her hand. It was the cleanest and most devastating thing I have ever experienced, and I am not going to describe it further because some things belong only to the people who were in the room. Richard Whitmore did not come to the funeral. He sent flowers. He sent a letter that was beautifully written, and that told the truth about loving my mother in words that he had apparently been saving for 28 years to put on paper. He sent it to me. I read it once and put it in the box. I planned my mother's funeral alone. I arranged the flowers and the music and the reading, which was from Psalm 139, because my mother believed that being known by God was the ultimate answer to being unseen by the world. I chose her dress, the blue one she loved, the one that made her look like herself at her most complete. I stood at the front of the church and I spoke about her for 12 minutes, and I did not cry until I was back in my seat, and then I cried completely and without management because she had earned every tear I had. 340 people came to that funeral. Richard Whitmore was not one of them. I am telling you this not to build a case against him, though I understand if it sounds like I am. I am telling you this because it is the truth, and because this story requires the truth to mean anything. He did not come because coming would have required explaining who he was to people who did not know about me. Coming would have meant being present in public for a woman he had loved privately for 28 years. And he could not do that. Not even at the end. Not even when the cost of not doing it was a daughter standing at a grave alone. I buried my mother in March. In April, I went back to work. In May, I started therapy, which was the best financial decision I made in my 20s. And I started to figure out who I was going to be now that the person who had defined and shaped and anchored me was no longer in the world. Here is the part of the story where I have to tell you about the family I had never met. The Whitmore family. Richard's official family. Eleanor, his wife, who had been his wife for 40 years, and who I had heard about my entire life as a distant weather system, always present, always relevant, never quite touching me directly. Their 3 children. Robert, 40, the eldest, who ran the hospitality division of Whitmore Industries with a focused intensity that people described as his father's drive. Catherine, 37, who sat on the board and was known in Boston society circles for her charity work and her specific talent for making large amounts of money move in directions that improved her family's reputation. And William, 34, the youngest, who had gone a different direction from the family business and worked in environmental law, which everyone in the family treated as a charming eccentricity. I knew their names. I had done what any child in my position eventually does, which is to research the family that contained her father, to look at the photographs of the events she was never invited to to map the geography of a life she had been excluded from. I did not do this with bitterness, or I did it with bitterness and processed the bitterness in therapy until it became something more useful, which is information. I knew their faces. I had seen them in newspaper photographs, in the society pages of Boston Magazine, in the coverage of Whitmore Industries events. Robert had his father's jaw. Catherine had his height. William had his eyes. None of them knew I existed. That is what I believed for 29 years. I was wrong. But I didn't find that out until later, and you need to experience the story in the order it happened to understand what it means. After my mother died, Richard Whitmore called me more. Not dramatically, not with the sudden emergence of a man who had found his conscience. He called the way he had always called, irregularly, with long gaps between, but the gaps were shorter now, and the calls were longer. He asked about my work, my life, whether I was eating enough, which was a question that landed with a particular strangeness coming from a man who had missed 31 years of my meals. I answered him. I kept the calls civil. I was not warm, but I was not cold. I was, I think, the temperature of someone who has decided that anger costs more than she is willing to spend, but has not yet found the place that is past anger. He said once on a call in October, 8 months after my mother died, that he had been thinking about things. That there were things he should have done differently. That he knew the word sorry was insufficient. I said, I know. He said, I want to do something. There are things I want to make right. I said, what does that look like, Richard? He had always been Richard to me. Never Dad. He had never asked me to call him Dad, and I had never offered. The word sat between us like something neither of us was ready to touch. He said he would like me to meet his other children. The sentence landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, why now? He said, because I should have done it before. Because you are my daughter and they are my children, and the fact that they don't know each other is something I caused, and I should be the one to address it. I said, have you told them about me? He said, not yet. I said, then you're asking me to be a surprise. He was quiet. I said, I spent my entire childhood being a secret. I won't be a surprise. If you tell them about me and they want to meet me, I will think about it. But I won't walk into a room of people who don't know I'm coming and perform normalcy for their benefit. He said, that's fair. I said, yes, it is. We hung up. He did not call for 3 weeks after that. When he called again, he said he had told Robert, Catherine, and William. He said it had been a difficult conversation. He said their reactions had been varied. He said Robert and Catherine were upset. He said William had said he wanted to meet me. I thought about William, the one with his father's eyes, who had gone into environmental law, who everyone treated as an eccentricity. I thought about what it meant that he was the one who said yes immediately. I said, I'll think about it. I thought about it for 2 months. And then Richard Whitmore had a massive stroke, and thinking time was over. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something directly. If you are watching this video and you have not yet subscribed to Black Diamonds, I want you to do that right now. This channel exists for stories like this one. Stories about the daughters who were kept in rooms with closed doors. Stories about the women who built entire lives from what they were given and were still told it wasn't enough. Stories about what justice really looks like when the courtroom is a hospital room and the verdict is what you choose to do with your own heart. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your name and your city in the comments below. I want to know where in this world you are watching from tonight, because this story is for every single one of you. Now, back to the hospital. Richard Whitmore had his stroke on a Tuesday morning in November. He was 70 years old. He was at his office in the Whitmore Industries building on Boylston Street, and his assistant found him at his desk and called 911, and he was taken to Mercy General, where the doctors described his condition as serious and his prognosis as uncertain. His assistant, a woman named Patricia who had worked for him for 15 years and who knew about me, which is something I only realized later, called me within the hour. I sat with the news for approximately 4 minutes. Then I put on my coat and I drove to Mercy General. I want to tell you that I drove to that hospital because I had processed my feelings and arrived at a place of peace and was acting from my highest self. I want to tell you that. I cannot tell you that because it would not be true. I drove to that hospital because he was my father and he was possibly dying, and whatever I felt about everything else, that fact was a fact, and I was not able to sit in my apartment in Dorchester and pretend the fact wasn't happening. I parked. I walked into the hospital. I told the front desk nurse who I was and who I was there to see. She looked at her screen and then looked at me with the specific expression of someone who is realizing that a situation is more complicated than the paperwork prepared her for. Are you on the approved visitor list?" she said. I said, "I am his daughter." She looked at her screen again. "I see, there are family members here already." "Let me call up to the floor and, 'I am his daughter,'" I said again, not louder, just more completely, the way my mother had taught me to say things that were true and needed to be heard. The nurse made a call. A few minutes later, a hospital administrator came down and took me to a small waiting room on the 4th floor. She was kind in the practiced way of hospital staff who handle complicated situations regularly. She explained that Mr. Whitmore's family was present and that she would let them know I was here. I sat in that waiting room for 45 minutes. I know the time because I watched it on the clock above the door, the institutional clock with the red second hand sweeping its circle over and over, and I thought about my mother sitting in waiting rooms for 2.5 years, all the waiting rooms of her illness, and I felt her with me in a way that was not mystical but was real. The door opened. A man came in. Tall, Richard's jaw, expensive suit slightly loosened at the collar, the look of someone who had received bad news and organized himself around it already. Robert Whitmore was 40 years old and looked like the CEO he was, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as the face of a man who has been told something he cannot decide how to feel about yet. "You're Simone," he said, not a question. "Yes," I said. He looked at me for a moment in a way that was assessing but not unkind. "He's asking for you," he said. That sentence took a moment to process. "He's conscious," I said. "In and out, he's been saying your name." Robert paused. "He told us about you 3 weeks ago. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. I'm not going to pretend this isn't a lot to process," he said. "I need you to know that I'm not here to be antagonistic." He's our father too, and the situation is complicated, I said, the word I had heard my whole life. He looked at me. Something moved across his face. Yes, he said. He took me to Suite 412. And so I was back at the beginning. Standing in the doorway of that room, looking at the man in the bed, making the decision that took me 31 years to arrive at. Alina was there. She was sitting in the chair beside the bed, and when I came through the door she stood, and she was small in the way that people sometimes are when you have spent years imagining them as large, and she was looking at me with an expression I had not prepared for. Not hostility. Not the cold fury of a wronged wife looking at the evidence of her husband's infidelity made flesh and walking into her hospital room. Something much harder to navigate than that. She was looking at me with recognition. "You look like him," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "Around the eyes." I said nothing. "I'm Alina," she said. "I know," I said. She nodded once and sat back down. Catherine was standing by the window. She was tall and precise, and she looked at me the way lawyers look at evidence, not with emotion but with assessment. She said hello in a voice that was perfectly calibrated to convey nothing at all. William was standing near the door, and he was the one whose face broke when I came in. Not dramatically. He didn't cry or say anything theatrical. But his expression opened the way a door opens when the right key is used, and he said quietly, "I'm glad you came." I looked at him. He had Richard's eyes. He had an expression in them that I thought I recognized, though I couldn't place it yet. And in the bed, the man with the tubes and the monitors, and the gray at his temples that had become fully white since the last time I saw him. The man who had read to me on the floor of our apartment in Jamaica Plain and called me his girl in a voice that meant it. Who had sent birthday cards every year without fail and had not come to my mother's funeral. Who had paid for my education and hidden my existence. Who had told me I love you twice in 31 years and had meant it both times. Which somehow made it worse, his eyes were open, and they were looking at me. "Simone," he said. His voice was rough from the stroke, one side of his mouth pulling slightly. "You came." "Yes," I said. "I wasn't sure. I didn't know if you—" "I came," I said. I crossed the room. I sat in the chair on the other side of the bed from Alina, and I looked at my father, and I made my decision. Not the decision to forgive him. I want to be very clear about this because I think the word forgiveness gets used in ways that make it mean something smaller than it is. Forgiveness is not the same as absolution. It is not the same as pretending. It is not the same as saying what happened was acceptable or that the cost of it was nothing. The decision I made was this: I was going to be present. I was going to be his daughter, fully and without performance for whatever time remained. Not for him, for myself. Because my mother had taught me that you do not give people less than your full self in order to punish them. You give your full self because that is who you are, and who you are cannot be defined by what someone else did with your love. I took his hand. His fingers closed around mine with a grip that was weaker than it should have been at 70, but was still unmistakably him, still the hand that had helped me with a puzzle on a Saturday afternoon when I was 6, and had seemed like the largest and most capable hand in the world. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay," I said. "I need to." He stopped. His eyes went to Alina. Something passed between them that I was not part of, some long married language that required no words. Billionaire stood up. She looked at Catherine and then at Robert, who had followed me in, and then at William. "Give them a few minutes," she said. There was a moment. Catherine's face was carefully neutral. Robert looked at the floor. William looked at his mother with an expression I could not read and then looked at me with the one I could, and they went. Billionaire was the last to go. She stopped at the door and she turned back and she looked at me across the room, across her husband in the hospital bed between us, and she said, "Your mother was a good woman. I know that's a strange thing for me to say, but I knew about her for a long time, and I want you to know that I know that." I looked at her. "She raised you well," Billionaire said. "I can see that." And then she left. I sat with that for a moment. Then I turned back to my father. "What did you want to tell me?" I said. He was quiet for a moment, gathering himself. The monitor beeped steadily beside us. "The will," he said, "I changed it." I said nothing. 6 months ago, before the stroke. There are things I should have done a long time ago, and I kept thinking I had more time and I was wrong. He stopped, breathed, continued. "You're in it, Simone, equally, same as Robert and Catherine and William, everything split 4 ways." I looked at him. "I don't want your money," I said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because I want you to know that whatever I failed to do while I was living, I wanted to do something before. That's not how it works," I said. My voice was even. I was not angry. I was something past anger, something that had been processed into a different substance. You can't put something in a document and have it cancel 31 years. "I know," he said. "You can't make me real on paper when you couldn't make me real in your life." "I know," he said again. And the knowing was genuine, which was somehow the most painful part of this entire conversation. We were quiet for a moment. "I used to watch you," he said, "when you were young. I used to park down the street sometimes and watch you walk to school. I know that sounds strange," I said. "Strange, yes, I know how that sounds. I wasn't able to claim you publicly. But I couldn't stay away completely. So I watched. I thought about myself at 7, 8, 9 years old, walking to school in my uniform, my book bag over one shoulder, my mother's voice in my head reminding me to walk with my chin up, "Baby, you are nobody's less than," and somewhere down the street a man in a car watching me without my knowledge and calling it love. I thought about what it meant that he watched. I thought about what it meant that he couldn't come closer. "You were afraid," I said. He looked at me. "That's what it was, wasn't it? Not you weren't ashamed of me. You were afraid of what claiming me would cost you." He was quiet for a long moment. The monitor kept its steady count. "Yes," he said finally. "I was afraid of my father, of Alina's family. Of the business relationships, the board, the whole architecture of my life. I was afraid that if he stopped. That is not an excuse." "No," I said, "it isn't." "I know." "Fear," I said, "is not an excuse, but it is a reason. And reasons matter even when they're not excuses." He looked at me with something flooding his eyes that I was not ready to name. "Your mother," he said. "She used to say things like that." "I know," I said. "I learned it from her." I need to stop here again and tell you the twist, because this story has a twist and you have been patient and you deserve to have it now. 2 days after I sat with my father in Suite 412, while he was still in the hospital and his condition was stabilizing and the doctors were cautiously optimistic, William Whitmore asked if he could take me to coffee. We went to a place near the hospital, a small place, unremarkable, the kind of coffee shop that exists to be functional rather than beautiful. We sat across from each other with our cups, and I looked at his eyes, which were our father's eyes, and I waited. He wrapped both hands around his mug. I noticed this because I do it too, and he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond." I said, "Okay." He said, "I've known about you for 8 years." The coffee shop was very quiet. "I found a letter," he said, "in my father's study. I was home for Thanksgiving. I was 26, and I was looking for a pen in his desk, and I found a letter he had written to your mother. Not sent. Written but not sent. And it told me everything." I looked at him. "I confronted him," William said. "He confirmed it. He told me about you, about your mother, about everything." He paused. "And then he asked me not to tell the others. He said he would handle it himself. He said he needed time." "And you kept his secret," I said. "For 8 years," he said. "Yes." I sat with that. "I want you to know that I am not. I don't want you to think I was." He stopped. Started again. "Every year I kept that secret. I was doing to you what he did to you. I was participating in making you invisible. I told myself I was giving him time, that he would do the right thing, that it wasn't my secret to tell. All of that was true, and none of it was enough." "No," I said, "it wasn't." "I'm sorry, Simone." I looked at him across the table. At this man who had his father's eyes and had made his father's mistake and had apparently also inherited his father's capacity for eventually arriving at the truth, which was something, though not everything. "Why environmental law?" I asked. He looked surprised by the question. "Because I needed to work on something that was about making right what was made wrong," he said slowly. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, whether I went into this field because of you. Because of what I knew and what I wasn't doing about it. I thought about that. Probably," I said. He almost smiled, not with amusement, with recognition. "You're very direct," he said. "My mother was very direct," I said. He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What are you going to do?" he said. "With all of this. The will, the family, our father. What do you want?" I looked at my coffee. I thought about my mother at her kitchen table with the checkbook and the pencil. I thought about standing at her grave in March with 340 people who loved her and one man who couldn't be there. I thought about the box of birthday cards in my closet that I had never thrown away. "I want what I've always wanted," I said. "I want to be real, not on paper, not in a will. Real. I want to walk into a room and have the people in it know who I am without the explanation, without the complication, without the door that closes when the guests arrive." William looked at me. "That's not a complicated request," he said quietly. "No," I said, "it never was." What happened next happened in stages, the way real things always happen, and I want to take you through each stage because each one matters. Richard Whitmore was in the hospital for 11 days. During those 11 days, I visited every other day. Not every day I had a life, a job, a self to maintain, but every other day. I sat with him. I talked to him. I told him about my work, my apartment, the small details of my daily existence that he had missed, and that he listened to with the focused attention of a man who knows he is catching up on something that cannot actually be caught up with but is trying anyway. The family was there when I was there, And I want to tell you about that because it was not what I expected. Billionaire was consistent, not warm, not cold, present. She spoke to me the way she spoke to the nurses, with a precise politeness that had respect in it but maintained its distance. I did not resent her for the distance. She had been betrayed too, in a different way, for a different length of time, and she was handling me with more grace than she owed me. Catherine remained assessed. She watched me interact with their father, and I could see her recalibrating with each visit, adding what she observed to whatever she had already concluded. On the fourth day, she sat next to me in the family waiting room and said, without preamble, "What do you do for work?" I told her. "Financial analysis. My firm, what I worked on." She listened. She asked two specific, intelligent questions about my methodology. I answered them. She nodded and went back to her phone. That was the most Catherine gave me in those 11 days, and I understood it as significant. Robert was the one who surprised me. On the sixth day, when I arrived and Richard was sleeping, Robert was in the room and he said, "Can we talk?" And we went to the family room and he said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. Not for my father's choices. Those are his. But for the way I reacted when he told me about you 3 weeks ago. He paused. I was angry. At him, but I took it out on the idea of you. I said things about the situation that I would not have said if I had thought about it longer, and some of those things were about your mother and about circumstances that deserved more respect than I gave them. I looked at him. "What did you say?" I asked. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. That it was a gold-digging situation, that he had been taken advantage of. I was quiet for a moment. "My mother worked," I said, "every day of her life. She put herself through college alone. She built everything she had without anyone's help. She had the option to make my father's life very complicated, and she never did. She asked for nothing for herself, only for me. She died with her dignity fully intact." I paused. She was not a gold digger. She was a woman who loved someone who couldn't fully love her back, and she made her peace with that and raised a daughter anyway. Robert looked at the floor. "I know," he said. "I know that now. I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment. "Accepted," I said. He looked up. "Not forgotten," I said, "but accepted." He nodded. "Fair." William, who had already begun his process of making things right in the only way available to him, which was complete honesty combined with showing up, became over those 11 days the thing I had not expected. A beginning, not a brother yet. The word was too large for 11 days. But the beginning of what a brother might be, in the same way that a plant from a seed is the beginning of something that will take time and tending and cannot be rushed. Richard Whitmore was discharged from Mercy General on a Wednesday. He went home to the Whitmore family townhouse on Beacon Hill with a care plan and a physical therapist, and the slightly stunned air of a man who had survived something and was now faced with the question of what to do with the surviving. He called me the following Sunday. He said, "I would like you to come to dinner. A family dinner, all of us together." I was quiet for a moment. "Is that what everyone wants?" I said. "William wants it," he said. "I want it." Billionaire, a pause. Billionaire agreed. "And Robert and Catherine?" "They will be there," he said, which was not the same as saying they wanted it, and we both knew it, and the fact that he didn't pretend otherwise was something. "Okay," I said. "Next Sunday," he said. "Beacon Hill." 6 o'clock. Okay, I said again. I called my therapist the next morning. I want to tell you about that dinner in detail because I think it is the most important part of this story. More important than the hospital room, more important even than the deathbed decision, because the deathbed decision was mine alone, and this dinner was the first time anything that involved all of us existed in the open air. I arrived at the Beacon Hill townhouse at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. It was December. Boston in December has a specific kind of cold that gets into the architecture and into the people both, and the townhouse was lit from inside with warm light coming through the tall windows, and I stood on the brick sidewalk for a moment before I rang the bell. I was wearing my mother's earrings, gold hoops that she had bought herself when she got her first promotion at the hotel. She wore them on days when she needed to feel like herself completely. I had not taken them out of the box since her funeral. I rang the bell. Eleanor opened the door. She looked at my earrings. Something moved across her face that I did not fully understand. "Come in," she said. The townhouse was what you would expect, and also somehow more than that. Not showy in the way of people who need you to know what things cost. Showy in the way of a family that has lived with good things for long enough that the good things have become simply things, part of the texture of a life rather than a statement about it. Books and photographs, and the specific comfortable disorder of a house where people actually live. The photographs were the thing that stopped me. They were on a table in the entrance hallway, a table that held probably 15 framed photographs, the photographic record of a family's life together. Robert's wedding. Catherine at some kind of formal event. William in what looked like a national park, grinning at the camera in hiking gear. Richard and Eleanor young, the way people look when they don't know yet how much will happen. Richard with all 3 children at various ages. I stood and looked at these photographs for a moment. Eleanor stood beside me. "Your father wanted to put one up," she said, her voice quiet. "Of you, I told him to wait." I looked at her. "I told him to wait because a photograph on a table means something," she said carefully. "It means you belong here, and belonging here should be something you choose, not something he decides for you without asking." I looked at her for a long time. "That was kind," I said finally. "It was practical," she said. "I have a talent for making kind things sound practical." Something moved in my chest. The smallest recognition of a woman I had not expected to recognize anything in. "My mother was the same way," I said. Eleanor nodded once. Then she led me to the dining room. There were 6 people at that table. Richard at the head, still slightly changed from the stroke, his speech a little slower, his right side a little less cert, but present, completely and fully present in a way he had not been for me in 31 years. Eleanor at the other end. Robert and his wife, a woman named Diane who had been briefed and was handling the briefing with the careful hospitality of someone who is determined to behave well in a situation she had not chosen. Catherine, William, and me. I sat between William and an empty chair that was the negative space of my mother's absence, and I put my napkin in my lap the way she had taught me, and I looked around the table at my father's family, and I thought, these are my people. Complicated and delayed and arriving decades late, but mine. in the same way that the truth is yours even after it has been kept from you. It doesn't stop being true. Richard looked at me from the head of the table with the look I had identified at the hospital and now had a name for. Gratitude, not for my presence, for my choice. For the fact that I had come to the hospital and held his hand and sat with him and not made the other decision, the one that would have been easier and more justified and would have cost us both something that could not be recovered. He lifted his glass. "I want to say something," he said. His voice was slower, but it was his. "I want to say it in front of everyone because I have been saying things in private for too long, and private is not the same as true." The table was quiet. "This is my daughter," he said. "Her name is Simone. She is 31 years old, and she is brilliant, and she is principled, and she is here because she chose to be here, which is more than I deserved, and I am grateful." He paused. "I failed her. I failed her mother. I am not going to dress that up or explain it away. I am saying it plainly because it is plain. And I am saying it at this table because this table is where our family lives, and Simone is our family, and the door should have been open to her from the beginning." He looked at each of his children, Robert and Catherine, whose faces were complicated but present; William, whose eyes were the eyes of someone arriving at a completion. Then he looked at me. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness or warmth or a relationship we haven't built yet. I am just asking you to know that you are not hidden anymore. Not by me, not at this table, not anywhere." The room was very still. I looked at my father, and I said the thing I had not planned to say, the thing that came from somewhere below planning. "I know, Dad." The word landed. First time I had ever used it. I watched it reach him. I watched Richard Whitmore, $4.2 billion man, patriarch of one of Boston's most prominent families, face the full cost of everything he had failed to be and receive, in spite of it, the one word he had probably not allowed himself to want. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried. But something in his face changed completely. Something settled that had been unsettled for 31 years. "Thank you," he said, very quietly. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just don't make me say it in private." He looked at me. "Never again," he said. I picked up my fork. "Good," I said. "Now let's eat." William laughed first. A real laugh, the surprised kind, and it broke the surface tension of the room, and Robert almost smiled. And Catherine looked at me with the assessment face, and then, slowly, something in it shifted into something that was not yet warmth but was not its opposite either. And a leaner at the far end of the table raised her glass very slightly, and I raised mine back. We ate dinner. We were a family. A real one, the kind that has history and complication and doors that were closed too long and are now open, the kind that requires navigation and patience and the constant work of people choosing each other on purpose. We were a family. I have to tell you that, because I know how this story could sound. I know it could sound like a story about a man who spent his daughter's childhood hiding her and then got sick, and she forgave him, and everyone lived happily ever after, and the wealth fixed everything. That is not this story. This story is about what forgiveness actually looks like when it is not performed for an audience and not exchanged for something, and not the result of running out of other options. Real forgiveness is a thing you do for yourself. It is the decision to not let someone else's failure define the size of your life. It is the decision to show up as your full self even when the room you are walking into has not always made space for you, because you are not walking into the room for the room. You are walking into it for yourself. My mother taught me that, not in those words, in the way she lived, in the way she raised me without bitterness in a situation that could have produced nothing but bitterness. In the way she loved a man who could not fully love her back and did not let the limits of his love define the limits of hers. In the way she stood at the front desk of the Whitmore Boston with her chin up and her dignity intact, and did her job with everything she had regardless of what was or was not being reciprocated. I am her daughter. I have her stubbornness and her standards, and her exact way of folding napkins, and her inability to leave a room with the dishes unwashed. I have her gold hoop earrings, and I wear them on the days when I need to feel like myself completely. And I have, because of her, the ability to open a door that should have been opened a long time ago and walk through it without pretending it should have been easier or that the delay didn't cost things it cannot give back. I can hold both of those truths at the same time. She taught me that. The most remarkable thing about her was that she could have both things at once. I want to tell you what happened in the year after that dinner, because I think you deserve to know that it was not simple and also not impossible, which is the truest thing I can say about building anything real. Richard Whitmore recovered from the stroke with the focused stubbornness of a man who had been given a clear message and intended to use the time that remained. The speech irregularity improved significantly over 6 months of therapy. He went back to work part-time, which Eleanor allowed because she had spent 40 years being married to him and understood that taking the work completely away would take the person with it. He and I met for breakfast every other Thursday. Not dinner at the townhouse, not a formal thing, just breakfast at a diner near my office in the financial district, the kind of place with laminate menus and bottomless coffee and nobody watching. We talked, not about the past mostly, about the present and the future, about my work, about his, about books we were reading, about the city. The past came up in pieces, gradually, the way things surface when the water is calm enough to see them, and we looked at each piece together and set it down. He met my friends, not all of them and not at once. My best friend Keisha, who had known me since 7th grade, and who told him very calmly over dinner that she was glad he had finally shown up, and also that she had strong opinions about what he owed me, and that she intended to share them at some future point. He received this from Keisha with what I could only describe as appropriate gravity. He came to my apartment. This is the one that made me cry, which I did not expect and which I allowed, because I have my mother's refusal to cry in front of the wrong people, and he had become, slowly, the right kind of wrong person. He sat in my small living room in Dorchester and looked around at the things on my shelves and the plant on my windowsill that was too big for its pot and the photographs on my wall. And he found the one photograph I have of my mother and father together, taken on some early evening of their relationship before I was born, taken by someone else with my mother's disposable camera, informal and luminous, the two of them laughing at something. My mother kept it in a drawer. I had put it on my wall. He looked at that photograph for a long time. "She was so beautiful," he said. "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry she's not here," he said. "I'm sorry for a lot of things, but for that most of all." "Me too," I said. We sat with that for a while, with the sound of the city outside my window and the ghost of my mother's laugh in the photograph on the wall. Then he said, "What was her voice like? At the end?" And I told him. I told him about the last weeks and the last days and the morning in March and the curtains she had chosen at the discount store 15 years earlier, and the Psalm 139 and what she had said to me in the night before she died, which was, "You are going to be magnificent, Simone. You are already magnificent. And I don't want you to spend 1 year of your life making yourself smaller to fit into anyone's idea of who you should be." He listened to every word. When I finished, he sat for a moment and then he said, "She knew you better than anyone." "Yes," I said. "Better than I do," he said. "Yes," I said, "but you have time." He looked at me. "I have time," he repeated slowly, like he was making sure he understood the gift. "You have time," I said. Robert and I developed a professional respect that has grown into something that is almost friendship. The careful kind that forms between people who share blood and history, but not biography, and have to build the middle from scratch. He came to me last spring with a question about a financial structure for a Whitmore Industries acquisition, and I looked at it and found 3 things his team had missed, and he looked at my analysis and said, "You're good," and I said, "I know," and he laughed, and it was the first time I heard him laugh without it being managed. Catherine is still assessing me. I think she will be assessing me for the rest of her life, which I have decided to accept as her version of love, because some people love by knowing, and knowing requires the kind of sustained attention that looks from the outside like assessment. She sent me a text last month, out of nowhere. No context. It said, "That was a good call you made on the Alcott property." I had been consulting for a Whitmore subsidiary on that deal and had flagged a compliance issue that saved them significant money. I read her text and thought, some ironies complete themselves whether you plan them or not. I texted back, "Thank you, Catherine." She sent a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. That is Catherine. I am learning to love it. William has become, I am going to use the word now because it fits, my brother. It did not happen all at once. It happened over coffees and phone calls, and the time he came to Boston from D.C., where he lives and works, and we walked the Freedom Trail together on a Saturday afternoon, because he said he had never done it. And I said that was embarrassing, and he said, I know, let's fix it." We walked and talked, and I told him about my mother growing up in Roxbury, and he told me about the letter he had found and what it had cost him to keep the secret and what he had told himself to justify it. And we were honest with each other in the way that requires no history to support it, just the willingness to be seen. He is my brother. My father is my father. It is complicated and insufficient and real and alive and better than the alternative, which is not having it at all. I want to say something now about money, because this story has money in it, and I do not want you to misunderstand what I think about that. I did not contest the will. I did not decline the inheritance either, which some people expected me to do as a gesture of principle. I did neither. I accepted what my father left me because it was mine, earned not in the way that wealth earns itself through investment and compounding, but in the specific way that a daughter earns the acknowledgement of her own existence, which is simply by existing. I used a portion of it to endow a scholarship at UMass Boston, my mother's school. The scholarship is for first-generation college students pursuing business degrees. It is called the Gloria Carter Scholarship, and the criteria include academic achievement and financial need, and in the essay portion, a question that my mother would have loved. Tell us about a time you did something hard because it was right, not because it was easy. The rest I am building with. Not spending, building. My mother's instincts live in me, and my mother did not spend, she built. The scholarship had its first recipient last fall, a young woman from Roxbury, business major. First in her family to go to college. She wrote in her essay about watching her mother work 2 jobs and about learning from that watching that dignity is not something given to you by circumstance. It is something you carry. I read her essay at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the good kind now, and I thought about my mother at 23, standing behind the front desk at the Whitmore Boston with her chin up and her whole life in front of her. I thought about what she chose and what it cost and what it built. I thought about the box in my closet with the birthday cards. I got it out. I read every card, every single one, all 31 years of them. His handwriting, neat and consistent, the same handwriting on every card, the words changing as I changed from a child to a young woman, the love legible in every line, even when everything else about the situation was illegible. He loved me. He failed me. Both of those things were true simultaneously. My mother had taught me how to hold 2 true things at once. I put the cards back in the box. I did not throw them away. Here is what I believe. I believe that the damage done by invisible love that exists privately, in rooms with closed doors, in birthday cards and wire transfers and watching from the street, is not smaller than other damage just because it is quiet. The silence of it is not the absence of harm. It is a specific kind of harm. The kind that makes a child question her own reality. That makes her wonder if the love she can see is real, because it cannot be proven in the places where things are proven. I believe that race was the complication my father could not move past, the layer underneath the fear that he never named directly, but that was present in every choice he made about what could be acknowledged publicly and what could not, about what a Whitmore could be associated with in the architecture of Boston wealth and influence, and what he had to keep in a room with the door closed. I believe that. I have not heard him say it in those words because he does not have those words, or cannot bring himself to use them, which is a limitation I can acknowledge without accepting as a full accounting. I believe that my mother understood this and chose her life anyway, not because she had no options, but because she loved him, and because she was building something for me, and because she was the kind of woman who did not let what she couldn't control define what she could. I believe that children raised by women like my mother, women who carry everything and call it Tuesday, and make the biscuits and hem the dresses, and show up for the school play even after a double shift. Those children carry something in them that is stronger than the sum of what they were given. A specific gravity. The ability to stand in a room they were kept out of and be completely present in it without apology. I believe that justice does not always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like a scholarship at a school your mother went to. Sometimes it looks like a photograph on a wall that everyone at the table can see. Sometimes it looks like the word dad, said for the first time at a deathbed, not because the man earned it, but because you are your mother's daughter and your mother gave her love without conditions, and you are trying, imperfectly and permanently, to do the same. I believe my mother was right about everything that mattered. I believe she is magnificent. Present tense. The kind of person who remains present because they made things that continue. I believe I am her continuing. If you are still here with me, I need you to know what this story is for. This story is for every child who grew up in a room with a closed door, who knew they were loved in private and could not understand why private was as far as the love would go. You are not invisible. You are not less than. You are not a complication to be managed. You are a person who deserves to be named in the open, at the table, in the public record of a family's life. This story is for every woman who loved with everything she had in a situation that could not give her everything back, who built a life from whatever she was handed and raised children in the dignity of that building. Your work is not invisible. It continues. It is continuing right now. This story is for every person sitting in a waiting room of some kind, a hospital waiting room, a life waiting room, a waiting room of deferred acknowledgement and delayed recognition, who is wondering if the door is ever going to open. I cannot promise you the door opens on the schedule you need it to. I cannot promise you it opens before someone you love is gone. I can only tell you that you have the right to stand at the door and knock, and that the version of yourself that knocks without waiting for permission is the version your mother raised you to be. Open the door, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now if you have not already. Hit the bell. Tell your person to subscribe. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told out loud, in public, with the light on, and there are more coming. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. I want to know where you are tonight. I want to know if this story found something in you. I want to know if you are the daughter who was kept in a room, or the mother who did the keeping out of fear, or the person who is sitting with a truth about their own life that they have been calling complicated, when really it is just a door they have not opened yet. Drop it in the comments. This community is a safe place. This community sees you. My father is 71 years old as I tell you this story. He walks with a cane now, a concession to the aftermath of the stroke that took him 3 months to agree to, and that William finally convinced him to accept by pointing out that dignity and assistance are not opposites. He goes to the office 3 days a week. He calls me every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, which is a thing that began about 6 months after the dinner at Beacon Hill and has not missed a Sunday since. I am 31 years old. I live in a better apartment now, still in Dorchester, because Dorchester is mine, because my mother's city is mine, because I will not perform displacement as evidence of arrival. I have a plant on my windowsill that is too big for its pot. I have my mother's gold hoops in my ears on the days I need them. I have a brother who texts me environmental law articles at 7 in the morning and thinks this is a reasonable thing to do. I have a father. It is incomplete, as relationships go, made of years that cannot be returned and distance that cannot be fully closed and the persistent presence of everything that happened before we got here. I know all of that. I hold all of that. And on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock, his voice comes through the phone, slower than it used to be, warmer than it used to be, and he asks me how I am and I tell him and he tells me and we talk about real things in the open air, and it is not everything I deserved. But it is real. And real, I have learned, is what you build things from. Real is where things continue. Next week on Black Diamonds, a woman who signed a prenuptial agreement without reading the last page. A clause that her husband's lawyers buried in paragraph 47 that she found 7 years into the marriage and 3 weeks before she was going to need it most. What she did with that clause, and the lawyer she became because of it. That story is coming. Make sure your notifications are on. Because you do not want to miss what she does next. Until then, this is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you.